Welcome to Le Weekend, the bonus extended podcast episode for France News Brief. In case you missed one of our dailies, we've put together a convenient way to catch up on the stories from the past week in France, plus additional content about something related to culture, art, history, or current events at the end. If you enjoyed our daily updates, you'll find everything you need right here in a seamless recap of the week's most important headlines. Perfect for those who want to catch up in just one episode, Le Weekend is designed to keep you informed and engaged with a lighter touch at the end. Let's dive in. This is the news for Monday, November 10th. Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy has been released from prison pending his appeal. Just weeks after he started a 5-year sentence for conspiring to raise campaign funds from Libya, former President Sarkozy has been allowed to return to his private home, as reported by RFI. French lawmakers voted to tax American retirees who freely benefit from Social Security. Members of the Assemblée nationale backed an amendment to the Social Security regulations that would create a minimum contribution on foreign retirees who receive free health care, as reported by Le Monde. In France, women are working for free as of 11:31 a.m. on Monday morning until the end of the year due to wage inequality, according to feminist newsletter Les Glorieuses, as reported by France 24. France marked a decade since the 2015 terrorist attacks. A Race of Freedom paid tribute to the victims of November 13th attacks, with more than 1,500 people gathered this weekend at Stade de France before passing by Le Petit Cambodge, Le Carillon, La Bonne Bière, Casa Nostra, Le Bataclan, Le Comptoir Voltaire, and La Belle Équipe in homage to the victims, as reported by France 24. In related news, the sole surviving perpetrator of the 2015 Paris attacks is facing a new probe. French anti-terrorist prosecutors have launched a new investigation into Salah Abdeslam, the only convicted perpetrator of the 2015 Paris attacks, on suspicion he sneaked a flash drive holding jihadist content into his prison cell, as reported by Reuters. This is the news for Tuesday, November 11th. President Macron presided over the ceremonies commemorating the 107th anniversary of the 1918 armistice on the Champs-Élysées and at the Arc de Triomphe, also paying tribute to the Alsatians and Mosellans forcibly conscripted into the German army during the Second World War. The November 11th ceremonies mark the end of the First World War, but are dedicated to all soldiers who fell for France regardless of the conflict, as reported by France 24. President Macron met with Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas in Paris to discuss the full implementation of the ceasefire agreement in Gaza and assisting in drafting a constitution for the future state, as reported by France 24. The French central bank sees slight growth in the fourth quarter. Banque de France said high political uncertainty contributes to a slowing pace of expansion in November, although it did not give a figure in its monthly forecast, as reported by Reuters. The Transport Ministry said that France has no intention of further increasing the solidarity tax on airline tickets and added the current discussions on the sidelines of COP30 climate summit aim to encourage other countries to use such mechanisms to finance sustainable development, as reported by RFI. This is the news for Wednesday, November 12th. Parliament adopted the suspension of the pension reform. Demanded by the socialist parties in order not to censor the government, the suspension of the pension reform was finally voted today with 255 votes in favor against 146, as reported by Le Figaro. Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot said that France is worried that U.S. military operations in the Caribbean violate international law, as reported by Reuters. Former Congolese warlord Roger Lumbala is standing trial in France for complicity in crimes against humanity. For the first time, a Congolese national is being tried in France before the Paris Criminal Court for crimes committed in 2002 and 2003 in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as reported by Le Monde. Gabon's former First Lady, Sylvia Bongo, and her son, Noureddine, were sentenced in absentia to 20 years in prison. The trial of the wife and son of ousted President Ali Bongo has revealed a vast embezzlement network involving enormous sums of money, as reported by Le Monde. This is the news for Thursday, November 13th. France paid an emotional tribute to 130 people killed 10 years ago during a rampage by gunmen and suicide bombers. Ceremonies took place at each site that was attacked on November 13, 2015, from the Stade de France to the Bataclan Concert Hall, as well as a ceremony in the Memorial Garden in central Paris, as reported by Le Monde. Unemployment in France rose slightly in the third quarter. The number of unemployed in France increased by 44,000 compared to the previous quarter, reaching 2.4 million, according to data from statistics agency ANSEE, as reported by Cercle Finance. French authors are suing TikTok over alleged copyright violations. The French Society of Dramatic Authors and Composers filed a lawsuit in Paris accusing the Chinese-owned platform of using extracts from films and shows without permission or fair compensation. A first hearing is set for March 18th, as reported by Le Monde. French Interior Minister Laurent Nunez is likely to visit Algeria as relations with France thaw. Nunez hailed the North African country's release of writer Boualem Sansal as a glimmer of hope that relations between the two nations could be mended, as reported by Reuters. President Macron announced new funding to prepare for the militarization of space. The president pledged 4.2 billion euros in new funds for military activities in space and singled out Russia as a principal threat in space-based tensions. Macron said in Toulouse, France's space and aviation hub, which is home to its new Space Military Command Center, that space is no longer a sanctuary, it has become a battlefield, as reported by Le Monde. A new Paris-Berlin night train will start in March, passing through Brussels. The Dutch-Belgian rail cooperative European Sleeper will launch a new thrice-weekly night train between Paris and Berlin, starting at the end of March, with the new service bypassing Strasbourg, and will partially compensate for the discontinuation of the Paris-Berlin and Paris-Vienna night trains operated by French SNCF, German Deutsche Bahn, and Austrian OBB companies, as reported by Le Figaro. French power utility EDF will shut down the Flamanville nuclear reactor for 350 days starting next September 2026. The reactor is set to reach full capacity output by the end of the year for the first time, as reported by Les Echos. This is the news for Friday, November 14th. French inflation was revised down to 0.8% year-on-year in October. The figure came in below analysts' expectations and the preliminary reading published last month by statistics agency ANSEE, as reported by Reuters. The French government is reporting 6 other platforms to the courts: eBay, Joom, Temu, Wish, and AliExpress for selling illegal products, and Amazon for failing to comply with filtering of minors, as reported by France 24. The French Environment Minister chastised TotalEnergies for launching a fossil fuel project in South America. TotalEnergies, among the world's biggest energy companies, announced last year that it would invest some $10.5 billion in Suriname, South America's smallest country, which is seeking to exploit its oil and gas reserves, as reported by Le Monde. Shots were fired as Paris police neutralized a man who had threatened to kill his wife and children at Montparnasse station. The man, who had disembarked from a high-speed train from Rennes to Paris, was intercepted as he was expected by a police roadblock, as reported by Le Parisien. You are listening to Le Weekend, and now that you're all caught up with the headlines from the past week, it's time for our bonus story. Today we're looking at the commemoration of the attacks of 2015 and why they made the news this week. Paris marked the 10th anniversary of the 2015 terrorist attacks with a series of solemn commemorative ceremonies, public tributes, and quiet moments of remembrance across the city and the country, particularly at sites directly struck by violence, such as the Bataclan Concert Hall and the recently dedicated November 13th Memorial Garden behind the Hôtel de Ville City Hall in central Paris. The outpouring of emotion not only reflected the ongoing grief 10 years on, but also the resolve of a nation forever changed by the attacks. On November 13th, President Emmanuel Macron, joined by Paris Mayor Anne Hidalgo, led commemorations at the main sites affected by the attacks, starting at the Stade de France football stadium. At the Bataclan Concert Hall, where most of the casualties happened, a moment of complete silence enveloped the neighborhood. The ceremonies culminated in a new garden, created as a living memorial, containing 6 slabs marking the locations attacked, each engraved with the names of the victims. This space, intentionally designed as a growing garden, represents a bridge between memory and renewal. Survivors, victims groups such as 13-15 Fraternité et Vérité, and the families of those killed participated alongside officials in these emotionally charged moments. The ceremonies extended partly to the European level, with events at Europol referencing the broader terror wave of 2015 and 2016 that affected multiple European cities. Earlier the same year, the country had already been rocked by a tragedy that had resonated around the world: the shootings at the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo. The January 2015 attacks serve as a significant and tragic precursor, both marking some of the darkest moments in recent history. On January 7th, 2 brothers, Sherif and Said Kouachi, armed with assault rifles, stormed the editorial meeting of Charlie Hebdo in Paris, killing 12 people. The attack initiated a nationwide 3-day manhunt, culminating in a tense siege, a supermarket hostage crisis, and a police casualty. This attack profoundly influenced France's approach to terrorism, particularly Islamist extremist threats, both events deeply linked in the public memory and discourse surrounding terrorism in France, underscoring a year marked by violence. The Charlie Hebdo attacks, with their brutal targeting of freedom of expression, also amplified debates about secularism, security, and multiculturalism, themes that echoed strongly around the world with messages of Je suis Charlie, I am Charlie. The memory of the Charlie Hebdo victims continues to be honored alongside those of the November attacks, as part of a wider narrative of resilience and remembrance. The attacks of November 13th unfolded as a sequence of coordinated assaults carried out by Islamist militants. Paris and the northern suburb of Saint-Denis were the scenes of carnage, with the violence beginning at the Stade de France during a football match attended by then-President François Hollande. Suicide bombers attempted to go inside the crowded arena but were intercepted, detonating explosives outside the stadium. Attackers also targeted nearby bars, restaurants, and, most infamously, the Bataclan concert hall. The Stade de France saw the first explosions around 9:20 p.m. Just minutes later, gunmen attacked restaurants and bars in the 10th and 11th arrondissements, indiscriminately firing on patrons and passers-by. At the Bataclan, gunmen entered during a concert, opened fire on the audience, and took hostages, leading to a protracted siege during which 90 people were killed. Altogether, 130 people lost their lives, hundreds were wounded, and Paris was left in profound shock. The attackers operated in coordinated squads and used automatic weapons and suicide vests. The assaults were reportedly planned in Syria and organized by a terrorist cell operating in Belgium. The assailants included European nationals, some of whom had returned to France, among the flow of migrants from Syria. Cell phones recovered on the scene revealed real-time coordination from Brussels during the attacks. The siege at the Bataclan concert hall ended with an assault by an elite police squad. As police stormed the building, 2 attackers detonated their suicide vests, ending their lives, while a third was shot. Other suspects were later traced and killed in a fiery police raid in Saint-Denis just days after the attacks. The terrorists had claimed responsibility for the Paris attacks, stated they were retaliation for French airstrikes in Syria and Iraq, and also an ideological attack on Paris, which they labeled a center of abomination and perversion. President Hollande declared the violence an act of war and imposed a national state of emergency that remained in place for over a year. In the aftermath, spontaneous tributes converged on the sites of the attacks. Thousands left flowers, candles, letters, and mementos on sidewalks and at public squares, most notably at Place de la République and outside the Bataclan. These ephemeral memorials were unprecedented in scale and marked a significant moment in collective public grieving. The Musée Carnavalet, the Museum of the History of Paris, has gathered and preserved many of these objects, reflecting the significance of popular memorials in modern Paris history. Survivors of the attacks have spoken publicly about their experiences, the trauma, and mostly about their determination not to let fear dominate their lives. One survivor, Denis Plod, was at the Bataclan when the attack began. I heard sounds resembling firecrackers mixed with screams, Plod said, and I soon realized something terrifying was happening. I rushed up to the 3rd floor where I found a small room quickly filled with others seeking refuge. Claude described the ordeal of waiting in silence, hearing gunshots, and eventually witnessing the traumatic aftermath when police led survivors out. Claude remembers the words of an officer directing them to try not to look at the bodies. "Look straight ahead, sir. They're all dead. There's nothing you can do for them." Other survivors have recounted the cognitive dissonance of such violence, the sense of unreality, and their survival strategies. You don't move, you pretend to be already shot, already dead. The randomness of survival and sudden shattering of everyday life remain a part of ordinary days for those who lived through the night. More lives were affected than those of the victims. First responders have consistently recalled the scale of chaos and horror that faced them that night. Dr. Mathieu Langlois, Chief Medical Officer of the RAID, the French National Police Intervention Group, was the first rescuer to enter the Bataclan following the deadly attack. An anesthesiologist at a Parisian clinic, this highly trained, then 46-year-old entered the concert hall that evening with an assault team from the intervention group dressed in black. Recounting the day to French weekly magazine Marianne, he said that his job, however, wasn't to know where the killers were or even if they were still firing, but to think about the medical deployment and the evacuation of the wounded. He suspected, unfortunately, that there would be many. Unlike the raid members, he was not armed. It was an absolute rule. Entering the concert hall, he said, "We discovered the floor littered with victims, mostly seriously injured. They were everywhere. The impact was as violent as it was necessary. In a few seconds, I mustered all my strength to find solutions and take actions. Without this emotional shock, I might not have been able to surpass myself, or at least find the physical, psychological, and mental resources to put into practice in the best possible way what we had been trained for." Addressing the commander, he asked for protection. They would leave those upstairs for the moment and concentrate on the pit. Snipers were positioned in pairs at the four corners of the pit, and at that point, Langlois remembered he started yelling, "If anyone can move, come to me." 10 years on, the attacks remain a defining trauma in French society. Annual commemoration ceremonies have become touchstones for victims' families, survivors, first responders, and the broader community who gather to remember, reflect, and reaffirm their commitment to collective resilience. Many survivors have become advocates or participants in victims' associations. Some public tributes now deliberately blend mourning with celebration of life and resilience, as in the design of the new memorial garden, where this week a choir composed of survivors and families of victims performed to a national audience for the first time. The decade since the Paris attacks of November 2015 has seen the city and its people navigate grief, trauma, resilience, and remembrance. This week's commemorations brought together all of these strands, reinforcing the enduring significance of the attacks in Parisian history and in the global struggle against terrorism. The voices of survivors and first responders, the scars carried by families and communities, and the memorials built in the aftermath serve as reminders not only of what was lost, but also of the enduring will to live under the national values of freedom and fraternity. Thank you for listening to Le Weekend, your one-stop destination for everything we covered this past week in France. Catch our daily France News Brief roundups of the main news in France every weekday, wherever you get your podcasts. Stay informed.